The Reverend Mike Morris is a retired ordained minister of the United Church of Christ with a Master of Divinity degrees from Oberlin and Vanderbilt. He served several pastorates in D.C. and Virginia and a couple of other states. Currently lives in Frederick with his wife, C. Raven, who has also joined us today, both of whom are social justice advocates for many causes and are active in the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Frederick. They have a flock of grandchildren, plus great-grandchildren. Mike has a very personal experience with dementia. His first wife died in 2016 of Alzheimer's after a more than 9-year struggle, so he knows what the issues are. He's a member of the Speakers Bureau of the Final Exit Network and is very passionate about death with dignity issues. Let me turn it over to Mike, who can talk to us.
Thank you, Don. How many of you are familiar with Final Exit Network? Do you know what it is? Okay. Final Exit Network is one of several death with dignity organizations in the United States. Compassion and Choices is another one that we heard from this morning with Donna Smith. We do some of the same work, though Compassion and Choices is heavy on the legislative end in lobbying legislators across the country on death with dignity issues. Final Exit Network, on the other hand, is more interested in education issues, helping people become aware of the choices that they have, the end-of-life options. FEN also provides surrogates, doulas, they're called, who will accompany people in their journey at end of life, and this is free of charge, and that's available anywhere in the nation. So that is one of the benefits that one gets if you become a member of Final Exit Network. I want to talk, first of all, there are some documents here. The Supplemental Advanced Directive for Dementia Care. And probably you all ought to have one of those in front of you as I'm talking. Okay, we'll wait a moment and let those be handed out.
Thank you for coming.
I generally, in presentations, spend a good bit of time talking about advanced directives, but I'm not going to do that because I think much of that has already been done. But I would just say that they are very, very, very important. So there's a whole seminar running concurrently with this on doing precisely that. But a word to you that this is very important. Just as recently as 2 months ago in my own extended family, we found ourselves in a crisis because there were not any advanced directives. And there is nothing more frustrating to a family to have a loved one unable to communicate and not having the faintest idea what they want or what they don't want. It leaves people in the lurch. So please, if you don't have advanced directives of several kinds, please do them. Donna Smith talked about medical aid and dying this morning. You all heard that presentation, I hope. It was very, very good. But you realize that medical aid in dying is only for those people who are physically and mentally competent and who have been given the sad news that they have less than 6 months to live, which is the guideline also for hospice, is a 6-month guideline. So that's an important, this is important stuff. Unfortunately, because there are only 10 jurisdictions in the country where this is available, D.C. being one, it leaves an awful lot of people out. Furthermore, there's a vast swath of people who are left out of this entirely. And these are the people who have or will have dementia or Alzheimer's in the future. It is estimated that by 2030, there will be fully 10 million people with dementia and Alzheimer's. So Final Exit Network has been recently working on something very, very special and revolutionary to address what I think is a real crisis. And it has 2 prongs to it. You have the supplementary directive in front of you, but we can't talk about that directive without talking first about VSED. Are you familiar with VSED? Voluntary suspension of eating and drinking. Okay. As I said in that session this morning, patients have always had, and it's written into law, patients have always had in this country the option of curtailing treatment that they don't want. If you don't want the chemo, you don't need to take it. If you don't want the cancer operation, you don't need to do it. If you don't want tubes stuck in you, you don't need to do it. Okay, this follows along this line that if you do not have the option to end your life as you think through your options, if you can't end your life using medical aid in dying, what's left to you? One of the options that's associated with this advanced directive has to do with VSED, the voluntary suspension of eating and drinking. Okay. I have a good doctor friend. His name is Jeff Coleman. He works for hospice. And he has seen VSED many times. He's an expert on it. And he guarantees that this process takes from 10 to 14 days, usually. When you stop eating and drinking, and especially the drinking part, the organs begin to shut down very, very rapidly. Probably they begin shutting down in a matter of 24 to 48 hours. It's that fast. No cheating, no sucking on ice cubes. You get a lot of water out of ice cubes. No wet washcloths in the mouth. You can use lip balm to help the dry lips, but no drinking of water. You've really got to be disciplined on this issue. So there is generally that discomfort, mainly from dehydration. It's nice to have a doctor present if you can. Nice to have a guide from FEN if you want one. But you can do this all by yourself if you really want to. A doctor can provide palliative care if there's some pain involved. That's certainly acceptable. So the process takes, as I said, from 10 to 14 days. Many of you remember the story of Diane Rehm? You remember who Diane Rehm did her show on NPR, I think, quite a few days a week. And her husband, John, died of he was dying of debilitating Parkinson's disease. Diane was quite angry in the end because he had to end his life using VSED, this voluntary suspension of eating and drinking, precisely because medical aid in dying was not available to him. So, the second prong of this initiative, so you have to understand VSED because that's built into this document. So if you read the advance directive, you will see that it talks about VSED. That's the method. So the person chooses their end point of life, what they have determined, while they are still capable of making that decision. So you need to make the decision early on in your dementia. So, let me just quote from the document here. I intend that my healthcare surrogate alone will be the one to determine when I have reached my chosen end. It's written into the document. When I have chosen end point, I authorize my healthcare surrogate to take any legal action necessary to enforce my choice to die from VSED if I have reached my chosen end point. So you can work your way through that advance directive and read the details on it. But let me model for you this whole experience that that I went through, and in contrast, what I wish I could have gone through if this supplemental directive had been available. All right? So I mentioned that my wife of nearly 56 years died of Alzheimer's. And I wish that this directive had been available, say, in 2011, when she was plummeting into that terrible abyss and emptiness of Alzheimer's, because she knew and I knew what was coming. We knew because we had both seen it. The year was 1992, the beginning of December, and it would be our fourth 600-mile trip to Michigan to see her dying mother, a delicate, shy, prim, and proper person. My father-in-law was attempting to take care of her. He was a good man, but he didn't have a clue. He tried to keep her alive by feeding her. So one of the things that this talks about in the directive, you stop the feeding and you get the food out of the room. You don't even tempt the person by trying to feed them, okay? So he would prop her in a chair and try to feed her. And she'd take a spoonful of food and she'd just hold it in her mouth, sometimes for 10 or 15 minutes. Chew your food, Judy. Chew your food. You can do it. You can do it. Chew your food. And she'd just glare at him, filled with what I perceived to be painful terror, as if to say, "You fool, can't you see that I don't know how anymore?" Because this is what happens. You don't know how anymore. Judy had 5 sisters, and we think all 5 of them died of Alzheimer's or dementia. So my beloved Carol knew the likelihood was very, very great that she too would sometime die of Alzheimer's. So this trip to Sparta in Michigan was one of foreboding. We drove through a blizzard, got to Sparta in the wee hours of the morning, and we sat in the living room, Carol and I, and suddenly we heard a thud. It came from the bedroom down the hall. There was a period of silence. Then Carol's dad appeared, clearly exhausted. And he said, "She's fallen, and I can't get her up. Mike, I need you to help." So I went to the bedroom. The adrenaline was pumping. It smelled of urine and feces. Judy was on the floor with a soiled diaper, half off. Her nightie also half off. The bed sheets were filthy. "I need to get her on the toilet, Mike. Can you pick her up?" So I did. And I half pulled and dragged her to the bathroom and placed her on the toilet. And her face was just filled with horror. Who is this monster? He deserves to rot in hell. And a washcloth appeared from somewhere, I don't know where, and I wiped her and tried to clean her up a bit while the sweat was literally pouring off me. And I looked over in the doorway of the bathroom, and my father-in-law stood there, and my wife Carol stood there. Only now, tears of anguish were running down her face, more than I've ever seen before. And I went over to her, and she pulled me into her arms, and she literally crushed me in an embrace that I could feel her bones. And she said, "Mike, oh Mike, never let this happen to me. Please, please." Carol's journey was not nearly as horrific at the end, though I would estimate that if we had had this directive, probably it would have been over maybe a year or a year and a half before it was. We had hospice at the end. They were wonderful. She was in it for 7 months, so they renewed it, and then she literally shut down, and she died really quite peacefully. But it should come as no surprise to you that I look at this directive and I look at VSED, voluntary suspension of eating and drinking, as works of compassion and works of love. I think they really are. It's another way, it's an option of celebrating the goodness of life and the sweet dignity, if we can still have some of that, the sweet dignity of death. And finally, peace. So, let's open it for discussion if you want. Maybe that's enough.